The private dining salon at the Al Naim penthouse looked like a stage built for billion-dollar whims. Obsidian floors polished to a mirror, a chandelier formed from cascading quartz, and a table set for a negotiation disguised as a celebration. The sheikh sat at the head, draped in immaculate white, his confidence sharpened to a blade's edge. Tonight was meant to seal a 240-meter cultural acquisition, an archive of rare desert manuscripts he swore would define his legacy. But the moment the waitress stepped in, balancing a tray of crystalline glasses, the air shifted. She moved quietly, with the soft precision of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. No one noticed the tremor in her breathing. No one except him. He watched her pass and, with a smirk carved in entitlement, addressed her in a clipped Gulf dialect. Fast, mocking, the kind used to test how little a servant knew. His guests laughed. It was supposed to be a small humiliation before the ink dried on his empire. She paused, lifted her eyes, and answered him in flawless, measured classical Arabic, calm, resonant, leaving no room for laughter. The room froze, not because of her beauty or her voice, or even the linguistic perfection. It was the authority, the kind that shouldn't belong to a woman pouring water. The sheikh's expression faltered for the first time all evening, but she didn't linger. She simply set the final glass on the table and walked away, disappearing behind the velvet partition, leaving his ego suspended in silence. None of them knew she was the only person in the room capable of unraveling the 240-meter fraud waiting beneath those documents. None of them knew she would be forced back into the center of the negotiation before the night was over. Power is quiet until someone tries to crush it. He stared at her walking away, unable to understand how he had missed someone like her. She didn't stop walking until she reached the service corridor, narrow, metallic, lit by a single humming strip. Only there, away from the chandelier's judgment, did her lungs finally unlock. She pressed her palm to the wall, grounding herself, fighting the shaking in her fingers. It wasn't fear of the sheikh, it was recognition. The documents on that table, the whispers she had overheard all week, the name of the archive that didn't match the centuries claimed in the contract. She knew that collection. She had seen fragments of it during her abandoned PhD, before debt crushed her scholarship, before her immigration paperwork failed, before silence became her only survival strategy. She told no one, not even the manager who thought she was just another transient service worker. She had spent the last 3 years hiding her intellect the way some hide scars. But now the humiliation had pulled her into the light, and the timing was catastrophic, because the sheikh's cousin, the man coordinating the acquisition, slipped into the corridor mere seconds later. "Stay," he ordered, voice low, dialect rougher than the sheikh's. "He wants you present for the presentation. You impressed him." Her stomach tightened, not admiration, curiosity, the kind that could be dangerous when a 240 deal sat on the edge of a pen stroke. She followed him back inside. The salon had regained its performance calm. Plush chairs, long shadows, the quiet hum of old money preparing to congratulate itself. The experts, 2 men in tailored suits, were arranging the manuscripts on the table with theatrical reverence. Vellum pages, lacquered bindings, gilded seals deliberately angled toward the sheikh. She stepped to the wall, hands behind her back, the way staff were trained to vanish. The lead expert cleared his throat and began. A flawless collection, perfect provenance, a jewel of pre-imperial desert literature. She felt the first knot of unease twist inside her. Perfect? No archive that old was perfect. The sheikh glanced at her only once, as if checking whether she understood this world. She lowered her eyes, pretending not to. Pretending, as always, to be less than she was. But already something was wrong. Something in the binding. Something in the ink's color under the quartz light. Something too uniform for a collection supposedly spanning 4 dynasties. Her breath thinned. They didn't know what she knew. They didn't know she had seen those pages before, under fluorescent university lamps, labeled not ancient, but reconstructed. Fear sharpens the mind more than ambition. She tried to steady her breath, but the expert's performance grew more elaborate, and every gesture pressed harder against her memory. They spoke with that polished academic confidence, just enough jargon to intimidate, not enough detail to invite questions. Their hands hovered reverently over the pages, pausing in choreographed awe. All she saw was the lie, the binding pattern, identical stitching tension across centuries. Impossible. Historical manuscripts breathe in irregularity. Different hands, different threads, different repairs across eras. But these, too even, too clean, too modern. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her face still. The sheikh, leaning back in his carved ebony chair, watched the presentation with the satisfied impatience of a man waiting for others to confirm what he already believed. He was convinced he had found the crown jewel of his cultural legacy. His advisors hovered behind him, nodding at every claim like an echo chamber with cufflinks. She kept her eyes down, yet her mind raced through details she had tried for years to forget. Back in the archives of her PhD program, these same texts had appeared mysteriously, without provenance, donated by a private collector whose name had been redacted. She had spent nights analyzing the ink composition, noting microscopic anomalies. Iron gall that behaved too uniformly, pigment distribution inconsistent with pre-imperial techniques. Her report had vanished. Her funding vanished soon after. And by the semester's end, she vanished too. Now the same ancient collection sat 3 meters away, priced at 240 meters. The sheikh's cousin approached her again, speaking in that clipped desert dialect sharpened to test obedience. "Stand closer. He wants you to assist if needed." She obeyed, stepping forward into the halo of chandelier light. It felt like stepping into an interrogation room. The lead expert turned a page slowly, theatrically. "Observe the seal," he declared, authentic to the earliest desert scriptorium. No, she had seen that seal under a microscope. It wasn't stamped, it was laser-etched. Her fingernails dug into her palm. The sheikh finally looked at her, amused. "You understood earlier?" he said quietly. "Understand this as well?" She didn't answer, not yet. Not until she had the full shape of the trap. Because this wasn't just a forged manuscript sale. Something in the phrasing of the contract packet on the table, a thick cream envelope, had bothered her earlier. A legal structure too heavy for a cultural purchase, too complex, too eager. And if the experts were lying about the texts, the contract was almost certainly a weapon. She swallowed hard, eyes tracing the edges of the envelope as if it were a live fuse. Truth hides until one frightened person chooses to see it. She stepped closer to the table, close enough to smell the vellum. An odor too faint, too preserved, lacking the earthy acidity true desert manuscripts exhale after centuries. The experts continued, layering claims with the smooth confidence of men who assumed no one in the room could challenge them. After all, who would? A billionaire eager to believe in his own legacy, a circle of advisors who feared contradicting him, and a staff trained to keep their eyes lowered. Except her? But she stood perfectly still, posture neutral, gaze modest, a ghost with a tray. The lead expert lifted one manuscript, angling it toward the sheikh as though revealing a sacred relic. "This piece alone," he said, "could command a valuation of $90 million in a private auction." The sheikh nodded, expression unreadable. "And the provenance trail?" The second expert smiled. "Immaculate. 5 generations of private custodianship. Her blood ran cold. 5 generations. Impossible. She had traced the earliest mention of these texts to a university basement only 20 years ago. But she said nothing. Not yet. The sheikh's cousin placed the contract packet on the table with deliberate weight. Thick pages, embossed seal, ribbon. Too ceremonial for a simple acquisition. More like a transfer of authority. Irrevocable, binding, dangerous. She leaned forward to pour water into the sheikh's glass, using the motion to let her eyes skim the exposed first page. One line stopped her breath. Custodial assumption of liabilities arising from historical claims. Her mind clicked. A trap. Not just financial, legal. If he signed, the sheikh wouldn't just own a forged archive. He would inherit responsibility for every future allegation tied to it. Fraud, theft, historical misattribution. A burden engineered to swallow him whole. She pulled back, careful not to reveal the tremor in her hand. He noticed anyway. His gaze sharpened, a man accustomed to reading weakness. But not this kind. "You disagree with something?" he asked quietly, amusement curling at the edges of his voice. The room stilled. Her throat tightened. Answering would expose her. Remaining silent would doom him. The lead expert intervened smoothly. "She's staff, Your Excellency. Nervous in front of distinguished guests." A soft laugh rippled through the room. She lowered her eyes again, an old habit of survival. But inside, a storm gathered. She remembered the letter that ended her academic life. Insufficient compliance with institutional expectations. A bureaucratic way of saying, stay quiet. She had stayed quiet for years. The sheikh tapped the contract with the capped pen, impatience rising. "Continue the presentation. I want this concluded within the hour." Every instinct in her body screamed. She needed time. She needed one unmistakable anomaly, something undeniable, before she could speak. Fear teaches a person how much silence can cost. The presentation intensified, each claim about the manuscripts growing grander, bolder, more theatrical, like a crescendo designed to distract from the cracks beneath. The experts dimmed the lights slightly to protect the vellum, but she knew the real reason. Partial darkness hides inconsistencies. Pigment behaves differently under shadow. Uneven gloss becomes less visible. Stitching imperfections blur. Unfortunately for them, she had learned to see in shadows. From her position behind the sheikh, she watched every gesture. His fingers tapped the table rhythmically, a tell of controlled impatience. He wanted the deal sealed. He liked the idea of legacy, of cultural immortality, of acquiring something no other collector had touched, and they were exploiting that hunger expertly. The lead expert slid forward a manuscript she recognized instantly because she had catalogued the same text years ago. Back then, her supervisor dismissed her observation that the ink crystallized in a pattern too regular for hand-ground pigment. And now, that same flaw gleamed faintly in the quartz light. She felt heat rise in her chest. They were passing off a recent academic reconstruction as a 13th century original. The second expert lifted the page with gloved hands. "Note the natural fading," he said, "a hallmark of age." "No, natural?" No. She had watched the restoration interns simulate that fading with a heat lamp. A knot tightened inside her. She was running out of time. Her gaze drifted to the contract envelope again. Its wax seal bore a symbol she didn't recognize. A stylized falcon breaking a chain. Not a cultural emblem, a corporate one. She shifted slightly, trying to see the fine print below it. She caught only 4 words. Immediate transfer of risk. Her jaw clenched. If he signed tonight, the sheikh wouldn't just lose money. he would forfeit legal protection. Any future revelation of fraud would fall entirely on him. While the sellers walked away, untouched, she felt her chest tighten with that familiar, suffocating fear, the one she felt when her immigration hearing lasted 7 minutes and ended with a cold stamp. The one she felt when the university reclaimed her research and left her with debt she could never repay. The one she felt every time her job required silence in the presence of men who thought they owned the room. Silence was how she survived. Tonight, silence was how disaster would happen. The sheikh glanced at her again, narrowing his eyes. "You look as if you have an opinion." The expert stiffened. She bowed her head. "Just observing, sir." "Good," he said. "Observe further. You'll tell me later if they missed anything." A flicker of panic shot up her spine. He expected a report. From her? A waitress? This was no longer about humiliation. It was instinct. He sensed something in her. Maybe intelligence. Maybe defiance. Maybe the small tremor she tried to hide. Either way, he had unintentionally handed her permission to speak. Permission she had spent years fearing. Knowledge is a weight. Silence makes it heavier. Her pulse hammered as the experts unveiled the supposed masterpiece of the collection. A thick folio wrapped in dark leather, its edges artificially frayed to mimic centuries of handling. They placed it on a velvet cushion, as though presenting a relic salvaged from the ruins of time. She felt the shift in the room. Anticipation, reverence, ego. This was the pièce de résistance, the item meant to push the sheikh from confidence to inevitability. The lead expert opened the folio with exaggerated care. "This," he proclaimed, "is the earliest surviving epic of the southern desert tribes, a text of incalculable historical value." Her breath caught. She knew that folio, not from a museum, not from any private archive. From a basement restoration lab where she had once spent 2 nights straight, analyzing the irregularities of its construction. The original source was a degraded bundle of pages, barely legible, heavily torn, chronologically inconsistent. The team had attempted a reconstruction, but it was incomplete, speculative, fragile. What lay before her now was pristine. Too pristine. As the expert turned the pages, she saw the same reconstructed passages, except here they appeared seamlessly integrated, as though they had always belonged. The gaps, the tears, the missing sequences, miraculously restored into a flawless whole. No, not restored, recreated. A modern composite pretending to be ancient history. She kept her breathing shallow, her body still, while her mind raced ahead in silent calculations. She needed one irrefutable anomaly, something that would not require trust in her authority, something the sheikh could see with his own eyes. But anomalies hide themselves well when wrapped in ceremony. The second expert began pointing out original desert script forms, but she saw the truth immediately. The calligraphy was too uniform. Historical scribes varied strokes depending on fatigue, ink consistency, humidity. But these lines were consistent across pages supposedly written a century apart. Impossible. She felt lightheaded. This wasn't just a forged archive. This was a manufactured epic, crafted to rewrite cultural memory, then sold at a price that would shield the creators from suspicion while framing the buyer as its protector. Her eyes drifted once more to the contract. Something new. The corner of a second envelope tucked beneath it. Smaller, silver-edged, marked Addendum C. Addenda appearing this late were never harmless. They were traps, hidden in plain sight, timed for pressure moments. She shifted subtly to get a better angle. The sheikh's cousin noticed and stepped closer, blocking her view with deliberate indifference. His posture told her everything. He wasn't just a facilitator. He was complicit. Her throat tightened. He was guiding the sheikh toward disaster. The lead expert closed the folio with a soft thud. "Your Excellency," he said, "with your signature tonight, you will secure the most important cultural acquisition of this century." The sheikh leaned back, thoughtful, proud, ready. She felt the world narrowing around her. Her invisibility had protected her for years. Tonight, it was becoming a cage. Fear is loudest when the room expects your silence. The sheikh lifted the pen, heavy, gold, ceremonial, and spun it once between his fingers. That small gesture sent a ripple of unease through her chest. It was the sign of a man seconds from committing himself, convinced everything aligned in his favor. The expert straightened. The advisors leaned in. The cousin moved behind the sheikh's chair like a shadow preparing to close the door. She stood 3 steps away, hands clasped, every muscle locked. The lead expert placed the contract in front of the sheikh with both palms, as though offering a sacred pact. "Your Excellency, if you wish, we can proceed to signatures. The verification phase is complete." Complete. The word echoed in her skull. She watched the sheikh skim the first pages with more confidence than caution. His eyes barely lingered on the dense legal language, the nested clauses, the shifting definitions. He trusted the team around him, trusted the experts, trusted the cousin, trusted the prestige of the event itself. But trust is a currency easiest to counterfeit. She scanned the room, searching for something, anything, that could buy her the seconds she needed to speak without being swept aside. A glass, a tray, a misplaced chair. The smallest disruption could redirect attention long enough to expose what mattered. Nothing. The room was flawless, designed for control. The pen touched the first signature line. Her heart sped so fast she felt it in her teeth. She hadn't just studied manuscripts. She had studied legal frameworks as part of her research. Contracts that transferred ownership of cultural items often hid dangerous clauses: custodial liability, indemnity, asymmetry, shifting provenance burden. And she knew, this contract contained something catastrophic. Not just financial ruin, reputation ruin, possibly criminal liability. The sheikh paused only once, glancing at her. A tiny flicker, a barely perceptible question. Maybe he remembered the way she had answered him earlier. Maybe he sensed something unsettled in her posture. But then he lowered his eyes again. The cousin leaned in. "Sign here, cousin. History waits for no one." It was too smooth, too rehearsed. She inhaled slowly, forcing her fear to quiet. She needed clarity, focus, a single detail that could anchor her intervention. And then she saw it. A microsecond flash of gloss on the manuscript's margin, an unnatural sheen beneath the chandelier. Not the matte patina of ancient ink. A polymer residue, sealant, the kind used in high-end forgeries to stabilize artificial aging. There. That was her opening. She stepped forward, 1/2 step, small enough to appear accidental, large enough to break the rhythm of the signing. The sheikh stopped mid-motion. The cousin's eyes snapped toward her. The experts tensed. One of the advisors exhaled sharply, annoyed. She froze, pretending embarrassment, lowering her gaze. But inside, she felt a thread of steel tighten across her spine. She could do it. She could speak. She could stop this. But the danger was real. One wrong word, and she would be removed from the room. And he would sign within seconds. She inhaled once, quietly. Courage begins as a tremor. She lifted her head just enough for her voice to carry. Not loud, not defiant, just steady, like the soft tone of someone stating a fact she could no longer swallow. "Your Excellency, the margin." The pen froze above the signature line. Every pair of eyes swung toward her, annoyance from the advisors, hostility from the cousin, strained politeness from the experts. But the sheikh, He simply waited. A man who had spent his life being obeyed could recognize when someone wasn't acting out of impulse. She stepped closer, moving like a servant requesting permission to exist. Her hands were clasped, but her mind was precision itself. She pointed, not at the text, not at the binding, but at the faint, almost invisible shimmer along the edge of the page. "May I show you something?" "Only if you wish." The cousin cut in sharply, speaking in that clipped desert dialect used to dismiss servants. "She's nothing. Step back." But the sheikh raised a finger, quiet, decisive. "Let her speak." The room air thickened. She leaned in, careful not to touch the folio. Under this lighting, the margin catches light differently than true ancient vellum. If you tilt it, just slightly, there. The sheikh angled the page, and he saw it, a glossy, thread-thin sheen. The lead expert forced a laugh. "A restoration sealant, standard procedure." She shook her head gently. "Not for vellum of this age. Sealants crystallize, they do not shine." The expert's smile faltered. She continued, voice even, each word placed with surgical restraint. "Polymer coating is used to stabilize recent material when imitating the surface wear of older manuscripts. It prevents flaking in fabricated layers." The sheikh looked up sharply. "Fabricated?" The cousin stepped forward, his voice low. "She is staff. She doesn't understand the science." She met the sheikh's eyes, just for a heartbeat. Enough to show she wasn't guessing. Enough to show she knew. Ancient vellum absorbs oil and sweat over centuries. It becomes matte. It never looks like this, unless a modern compound has been applied to disguise new ink. New ink. That phrase landed like a weight on the polished table. The sheikh's fingers tightened around the folio. The lead expert scrambled for footing. "With respect, Your Excellency, she is misinterpreting what she sees. These are certified by 3 independent." "Then why," she interjected softly, "does the polymer sit on top of the script layer instead of beneath it?" Silence. Pure, stunned, pressurized silence. She watched the sheikh's face change, not with anger, but with calculation. A lifetime of negotiations sharpening into suspicion. His gaze moved from the manuscript to the experts, to the contract waiting for his ink. He placed the pen down. The cousin's jaw tightened. The advisors shifted in their seats. The experts exchanged a glance that wasn't fear, it was panic. She stepped back again, hands behind her, posture humble. But inside her chest, something unlocked. A quiet certainty she had never felt before. Truth reveals itself only to those who risk naming it. The sheikh closed the folio slowly, deliberately, an action so calm it radiated danger. His advisors stiffened. The experts swallowed hard. The cousin forced a smile that looked painfully rehearsed. "Explain," the sheikh said. The lead expert tried first. "Your Excellency, the polymer is a standard conservation." But she stepped forward, soft but unyielding. "May I show you one more thing? Just one. It will take seconds." The cousin snapped, his dialect harsh. "Enough. You overstep. Leave." But the sheikh didn't look at the cousin. He looked only at her. "Show me." Her heart pounded, but her movements were steady. She reached for the side table where a single glass of iced water sat, condensation glistening down its surface. She lifted it as though performing a routine service gesture. Then she did something none of them expected. She placed the cold glass next to the open folio. A faint curl formed at the edge of a page, barely a millimeter, but unmistakable. Real ancient vellum responds slowly to humidity. Modern composites react immediately. The sheikh saw it. Everyone saw it. Vellum of this age, she said, would not warp this quickly. Not unless the fibers are new and manufactured to imitate age. Wah. One of the experts tried to lean in, voice cracking. The humidity in this room. She cut him off. Calm. Precise. The room is climate-controlled. The sheikh's gaze sharpened further. She took a slow breath. This was the moment. Her moment. The line between silence and intervention. "Your Excellency," she said quietly. "May I see the contract?" The cousin stepped in front of her so abruptly, his chair scraped the marble. "You will not." The sheikh's voice cut through him like a blade. "Move." For the first time, the cousin obeyed reluctantly. She stepped to the table, and he slid the contract toward her. Her fingertips hovered above it. She didn't touch, she only read. And there it was. Clause 11b. The trap that made every forged page exponentially more dangerous. She straightened, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying through the room like a verdict. "Your Excellency, this contract transfers criminal liability for provenance fraud directly to the buyer." The sheikh froze. She continued, each word measured. "Meaning, if a single manuscript is proven false in the future, you, not the sellers, become legally responsible for the deception, even if you are the victim." The sheikh stared at her, the weight of it settling in his expression. She added softer, "It reverses the burden of proof. You would lose even if you won." A long, cavernous silence swallowed the room. The cousin's face drained of color. The experts looked as if the floor might give way beneath them. The advisors whispered urgently among themselves. And the sheikh, for the first time all night, leaned back in his chair with the stillness of a man who had nearly stepped off a cliff. She felt her pulse throb through her fingertips, but she held her ground. Whatever happened next, she had crossed the threshold she had feared for years. Truth demands a voice before it becomes a disaster. The sheikh folded his hands, elbows resting lightly on the table. Not angry, not impulsive, just attentive, a dangerous kind of quiet. "Continue," he said. The experts flinched, the cousin's throat bobbed, and she, standing in the halo of the chandelier, felt something shift inside her. Not confidence, not yet, but purpose. She stepped closer to the manuscripts, careful not to touch them. "There are 4 layers of forgery," she said, all hidden under the performance of authenticity. The sheikh nodded once. "Show me." She gestured to the folio's binding. First, stitching. Manuscripts spanning centuries should show repairs, mixed thread density, irregular tension, differing restoration philosophies. This binding is uniform, machine perfect. The same person, same tools, same decade. One of the experts stammered, "Modern conservation sometimes—" "Not across 4 supposed dynasties," she replied. "No conservator would homogenize history. It destroys research value." The sheikh's jaw tightened. She moved to the ink. Second, pigment behavior. True ancient inks develop micro-fissures as they oxidize. If you tilt the page under the chandelier, like this, he tilted it. The ink shimmered unnaturally smooth. "See the gloss? That's modern pigment binder. It dries as a continuous film. Ancient ink dries as fractured islands." The advisors murmured in panic. The experts swallowed. The cousin glared pure venom at her. She continued, voice steady. "Third, calligraphy. Each scribe leaves a fingerprint, stroke pressure, grip fatigue, breathing rhythm. These pages, however, maintain identical pressure curves. Statistically impossible over centuries." The sheikh leaned forward, examining the strokes more closely. "And fourth," she said, turning toward the contract, "the legal trap." The cousin snapped, "That clause is standard." "No," she cut in. "Standard indemnity protects buyers from undisclosed defects. This reverses it. It criminalizes the buyer for any future dispute. If an academic challenges authenticity, the burden shifts to you to prove innocence. But forged composites like these are designed to avoid conclusive tests. She pointed to Addendum C, the small silver-edged envelope almost hidden beneath the larger contract. And this addendum mandates immediate public declaration of custody, meaning once you announce ownership, withdrawing the acquisition would appear like an admission of guilt. The sheikh's eyes went cold. She added quietly, "They built a no-exit corridor around your signature." The cousin stepped forward, voice trembling with forced authority. "These are distortions. She is inventing dangers that are not—" But the sheikh raised a hand. Silence fell. He looked at her, not as a waitress, not as a subordinate, but as someone who had just pulled him back from the edge of ruin. "What would happen," he asked calmly, "if I had signed?" She inhaled. "You would have spent $240 million on fabricated heritage, and within a year, when scholars disputed authenticity, you would be held responsible for cultural fraud. Not the sellers, not the brokers, your reputation, your standing, your credibility, gone." The sheikh exhaled slowly, a man absorbing the full magnitude of a nearly fatal mistake. The experts looked sick. The cousin looked cornered. She felt the room tilt, the power map redrawing itself in real time. And for the first time in years, she did not lower her eyes. Consequences begin with the truth no one else dares to say aloud. The sheikh turned the contract slowly, fingertips brushing each page as though tracing the outline of a wound he'd narrowly avoided. His voice, when it came, was measured but razor-sharp. "Show me the clause again." She stepped beside him, close enough to read, far enough to respect the space of a man whose world had just tilted. She pointed to the stacked paragraphs, buried deep inside the legal labyrinth. "Here," she said. "Clause 11b. The text was dense, almost deliberately suffocating. "The buyer assumes full liability for all historical, cultural, or provenance-related claims arising from the collection, irrespective of origin, timing, or authorship." He blinked once. "Irrespective of authorship," she nodded. "Meaning even if the fraud predates you, even if the forgers are caught, you remain responsible. You inherit the crime." A murmur rippled through the advisors behind him. She continued, voice steady, almost surgical. "But the real trap is hidden further down. Here, Clause 11c. He read silently, his fingers stilled. This clause was worse. "Buyer acknowledges the authenticity as represented and waives the right to pursue restitution or litigation against any party involved in procurement, certification, or transfer." She didn't soften it. "You sign and they walk away forever. Untouchable. You lose everything, legally barred from even proving you were deceived." The cousin's voice trembled with forced confidence. "This is standard—" "No," she said, cutting cleanly across him. "Standard contracts protect the buyer. This one isolates him." She tapped the silver-edged envelope, Addendum C. "And this final piece locks the trap." The sheikh gave her a slight nod. "Open it?" She did. Inside was a single page, thin, glossy, printed with immaculate typography. The language was unnervingly elegant. "Upon signature, buyer will immediately issue a public declaration of custodianship, establishing exclusive responsibility for all cultural integrity claims." She placed it on the table. The room seemed to hold its breath. "In plain language," she said quietly, "they force you to announce to the world that the manuscripts are yours. Once public, any future challenge becomes a scandal. Step back from the acquisition later, and it looks like you're hiding wrongdoing." The sheikh studied her, eyes dark with restrained fury. "They wanted the scandal to attach to me." Yes, she answered. You are the shield that protects them. A billionaire face to absorb the fallout. The forged manuscripts become a weapon, and you become its carrier. One of the experts tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Your Excellency! The sheikh shot him a look so cold the room froze. She felt her hands trembling, but not from fear anymore. From release. The secret she had carried for years was finally visible. Not dismissed, not ignored, heard. The sheikh leaned back in his chair, breathing slow, controlled. You saved me from a trap worth more than money. She swallowed. You saw the truth before you signed. That's what matters. He studied her again, more deeply this time, as if reassessing every assumption he'd made about her the moment she walked into the room. The cousin shifted nervously. Cousin. Let's not jump to conclusions. The terms, the sheikh said quietly, are a noose. And in that instant, the architecture of the scheme began to crack. Trust collapses fastest when built on deception. The sheikh closed the addendum with a slow, deliberate motion, as if sealing a coffin. The advisors whispered in sharp, frantic tones. The experts avoided eye contact, their stern confidence dissolving into shallow breaths. And the cousin. He stood unnaturally still, a statue carved from guilt. The sheikh shifted his gaze to her again. Who created this contract? The lead expert opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She didn't flinch. The language structure suggests a private legal team, not an institutional one. The clauses are designed with obfuscation in mind, repetition, conditional loops, vague liability terms. That's intentional. He nodded, absorbing every word. And the manuscripts. She looked directly at him. No trembling, no hesitation. Composite forgeries, high-end, modern, a mixture of reconstructed fragments and fabricated text. Someone wanted them to appear ancient enough to be priceless, but unprovable enough to avoid rigorous testing. The cousin stepped forward, voice rising. You're overstepping your role. This is slander against reputable scholars. The sheikh didn't even turn his head. Silence. The word wasn't loud, but it hit the room with the impact of a hammer. The cousin froze. She felt the eyes of everyone in the room drilling into her, waiting for her to falter. But she no longer felt like the girl who once stood in a cold immigration office being told she had lost everything she'd worked for. She felt aligned, purposeful, anchored. With a calm she didn't expect, she moved to the folio again. There's more. The sheikh arched a brow. More? She nodded. Yes, a fifth layer. The one I feared mentioning without proof. She reached for the small portable lamp sitting at the edge of the buffet table. The staff used it to check the cleanliness of glassware. She clicked it on. Its beam sharp, bright, unforgiving. Then she angled it over the manuscript's central page. Gasps. Small, unintentional, instant. Because under the lamp, faintly visible, a modern watermark glowed across the vellum, an industrial batch code used only in contemporary parchment production. The sheikh stiffened. The cousin paled. The experts shrank into themselves. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look triumphant. She simply stated, "This parchment is less than 20 years old. The watermark confirms it." The sheikh leaned in, eyes narrow. "You knew I would see it." "Yes," she whispered, "because it's undeniable." A deep, restrained anger rose in his chest. Not the anger of embarrassment, but the anger of a man realizing the depth of the betrayal aimed at him. He stood, the chair pushed back against the marble. "Who brought these to me?" he asked. The experts began pointing at each other, desperate, unraveling. Their facade of authority collapsed in seconds. Words tumbled from their mouths, Excuses, half-truths, references to unnamed collectors, vague claims of trusted intermediaries. The sheikh raised a hand. Silence dropped again. He turned to her. "You," he said quietly. "Step forward." She did. "You found the cracks," he said. "All of them." While the rest of them performed confidence, she held his gaze. "I only spoke because no one else would." A heavy, electric pause filled the room, and then the sheikh said the line that detonated everything. "From this moment on, I trust no one here except her." The cousin's face collapsed. The experts trembled. The advisors exchanged looks of dread. The scheme had officially begun to fall apart. When truth enters a room, loyalty reveals its true shape. The sheikh remained standing, his presence suddenly heavier, as though the center of gravity in the room had shifted to him and to her. He placed both hands on the table, palms flat, surveying each man with a quiet, surgical cruelty. "No shouting, no theatrics. Power doesn't need volume." "Explain," he said again, this time not to her, but to the men who had orchestrated the trap. The lead expert finally broke, his voice shaking. "Your Excellency, we were misled by the collector. We believed the manuscripts were authentic. We acted in good faith." She stepped forward, her voice calm but slicing through the excuses. "He's lying." Every head snapped toward her. She didn't retreat. "Earlier tonight," she said, "when they dimmed the lights to protect the vellum, he directed the assistant to reposition the lamp to his left. Not the right. That's because the left side reveals pigment layering under shadow. A person who fears exposure knows exactly where danger sits." "Yo," the expert stuttered, "that is not... I didn't..." But the sheikh was already staring at him like a man dissecting deceit with his bare eyes. She continued, her voice steady, her own heartbeat a drum under her ribs. "And the cousin signed off on the contract draft before the expert saw it. His initials are embedded in the PDF metadata." The cousin jolted. "You accessed?" "I didn't need to," she replied. The metadata displays automatically when the file is opened. It lists the last editor and device ID. Yours. A suffocating silence followed. The sheikh turned slowly toward his cousin. "Is that true?" The cousin's lips parted, closed, parted again, struggling for a sentence that wouldn't expose him. I reviewed the draft, yes, but only to facilitate the transaction. I didn't read every clause." She watched him carefully. Desperation makes patterns visible. "You didn't review it," she said. "You modified it." The contract uses Gulf legal phrasing inconsistent with the expert's region. And the liability reversal? That clause is identical to one used in 2 previous art fraud cases, both involving the same law firm your company retains. The sheikh's jaw clenched. The cousin stepped backward instinctively, as though physical distance might protect him. "You think I would frame my own family?" he spat. She didn't blink. The addendum forces public declaration. The moment His Excellency's name becomes attached to the archive, every scholar would rush to authenticate it. When they failed, the scandal would survive for decades. She nodded toward the experts, and these men would claim ignorance. The collector would vanish. The law firm would cite indemnity. And you, she turned her eyes to the cousin, would present yourself as the only family member capable of managing the crisis. The sheikh inhaled sharply. "You wanted his seat," she said. The cousin's fury cracked. "This is a fantasy spun by a waitress." The sheikh slammed his palm onto the table. The marble trembled. The room trembled. Even she felt the shock in her spine. "She is the only voice here that has not deceived me." The cousin stepped back again, sweat gathering at his collar. The sheikh lowered his voice. deadly quiet. You knew I wanted a cultural legacy. You knew I was vulnerable to that desire. You exploited it. The cousin stammered. I only— You only, the sheikh said, expected me to trust blindly. She watched the cousin's face break, the realization dawning that the scheme was no longer unraveling. It was collapsing directly onto him. Truth does not kill lies gently. It tears their roots out. The cousin backed away from the table as though the furniture itself had turned against him. The expert stood rigid, waiting for someone else to take the fall. The advisors hovered in uneasy silence, aware that the sheikh's fury, quiet, calculating, was far more dangerous than anger. She remained still, centered, observing the unraveling with a clarity she'd never been allowed to wield before. The sheikh turned to the experts. "Who supplied you with these manuscripts?" The lead expert swallowed. "A private collector. Anonymous." She stepped forward slowly, her voice steady. "Not anonymous. They used a routing technique I recognize." The sheikh's gaze sharpened. "Explain." She pointed to the catalog sheet the experts had displayed earlier. "This stamp, a tiny red emblem on the corner, is modeled after registry codes used in European rare book networks. But it's not a real registry stamp. It's a mimic, a composite of two inactive archives." One of the advisors frowned. "Inactive?" She nodded. "Yes. One dissolved 10 years ago. The other shut down 20 years ago. Whoever created the stamp combined their symbols to fabricate credibility. They assumed no one would notice." The sheikh's expression hardened further. "Meaning the collector does not exist." "Not as an independent entity," she said. "It's a shell identity designed to hide the real orchestrator." The cousin's throat tightened visibly. She continued. "The metadata of the contract, the fabricated provenance stamp, the timing of the presentation, all of it aligns." The sheikh looked at her, finishing the thought. "It was internal." She nodded once. "Internal and deliberate." The cousin erupted. "You accuse me with no proof." "There is proof," she said softly. "In your silence." The room shifted, every air particle seeming to lean toward her. She went on, calm and unshaken. "When I mentioned the watermark, you didn't ask what it meant. You asked how I accessed the contract file. Only someone who already knew the pages were modern would skip straight to defensiveness." The cousin's face drained, and earlier, she added, "when the sheikh considered pausing the signing, you stepped forward before the experts did. The guilty always move faster." The cousin snapped, "This is absurd." "Then why?" she said gently. "Did you insist the sheikh announce the acquisition publicly within 24 hours? Before authenticity review? Before independent examination? Before the ink on the contract would even dry?" She let the silence sink in. That timing only benefits the forgers and the person planning to capitalize on the scandal. The sheikh's advisors exchanged horrified glances. The cousin's voice broke into panic. I was trying to corner him," she finished. The sheikh exhaled slowly, a long, controlled release of betrayal. "What would have happened," he asked quietly, "if I had signed tonight?" The cousin froze, but she answered, "You would become the face of a cultural fraud worth 240 million. He," she nodded toward the cousin, "would present himself as the responsible family member who tried to advise caution. Your influence would collapse. His would rise." The sheikh's hands tightened into slow fists. Her voice softened. "You were the endgame. The scandal was the weapon." The truth hung heavy in the air. One of the experts whispered, barely audible. "We didn't know the full plan. We were told the sheikh wanted secrecy. We followed instructions." The cousin rounded on them. "You fools! Do not drag me into your incompetence. But the sheikh's voice sliced cleanly through it. You dragged yourself. The room fell utterly still, his gaze locked onto his cousin, quiet, precise, lethal. And in that silence she knew. The collapse was complete. When deceit crumbles, it leaves its architect standing alone in the rubble. The sheikh sank slowly back into his chair, but the power in the room flowed toward him like metal to a magnet. His silence became a verdict, waiting to be spoken. The cousin hovered by the wall, breathing shallowly, eyes darting for exits that no longer existed. The expert stood in varying stages of collapse, pale, sweating, suddenly aware of the gravity of the scheme they had agreed to front. She remained the only still figure in the room. Bring the contract, the sheikh said quietly. The lead expert lifted it with trembling hands. Closer, the sheikh ordered. They obeyed. He flipped to the final page, the signature line that nearly tied his life to a scandal engineered by blood and greed. He lowered the pen, not to sign, but to draw a single deliberate line straight through the page. Ink cut the paper like a blade. The cousin flinched. So, the sheikh said, voice calm, almost gentle, you thought you could rewrite my legacy. The cousin's breathing hitched. I never wanted… You wanted my fall, the sheikh corrected. You wanted to inherit what I built without carrying the weight of earning it. The cousin's words tangled in his mouth, desperation turning him clumsy. She tricked you. She planted suspicion. No, the sheikh said sharply. She saw what the rest of you hoped I wouldn't. He turned to her with a quiet, almost reverent gravity. Before tonight, I would not have believed a single voice in this room could hold more truth than all my advisors combined. Her chest tightened, not with pride, but with disbelief. Years of invisibility made acknowledgement feel unreal. He faced the experts next. You will return every cent of your consultancy fee. They sputtered at once. Your Excellency, and, he continued, you will provide full disclosure of the collector's identity, shell companies, and intermediaries. Immediately. The second expert cracked. If we reveal that, we'll be ruined. You already are, the sheikh said. He turned to the head advisor. Contact my legal counsel. Have them prepare to pursue fraud. The cousin broke. No, you can't. This was a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal, the sheikh replied. And it ends tonight. The cousin's spine seemed to fold under the weight of the words. But the room wasn't finished shifting. The sheikh leaned back again, studying her with a new expression. Not authority, not suspicion, but respect edged with something deeper. Recognition. What is your name? He asked. She hesitated. No one here has ever asked. Then tell me. She spoke it softly. It felt foreign on her tongue, a name unused for too many years. The sheikh nodded. Good. You will not remain a shadow in this place. She lowered her gaze, not out of fear, but to contain the rising swell of emotion she couldn't afford to show. The cousin, grasping for any weapon left, muttered, She's just a waitress. The sheikh turned his eyes on him, cold as polished obsidian. No, she is the only one in this room who behaved with integrity. The cousin fell silent. Something deep in her chest loosened, something bound by years of silence and erasure. Truth doesn't just expose. Sometimes it restores. Security arrived without fanfare. Silent, disciplined men in dark suits who understood the difference between removing a threat and escalating a spectacle. They positioned themselves along the walls, forming a discreet perimeter. No one had summoned them aloud. The sheikh's staff simply knew when his posture signaled enough. The cousin stiffened at their presence. Cousin, please, we can handle this privately. The sheikh did not look at him. Fraud is not handled privately. The cousin took a step forward, voice fraying. You don't understand what she is. The sheikh's hand lifted. He didn't even glance in her direction when he spoke, but the words landed with the blunt weight of truth. She is the only reason I am not signing my ruin tonight. The cousin's shoulders sagged. His composure was disintegrating, piece by piece. One of the advisors approached the sheikh cautiously. Your Excellency, shall we escort them, the experts, the cousin, to the holding suite? The sheikh shook his head once. Not yet. His gaze moved across the room with the controlled fury of a man choosing exactly how justice should unfold. He faced the experts first. You will provide a written declaration of every detail you concealed. Dates, sum of payment, parties involved. The experts exchanged frantic glances, knowing there was no path left except confession. Then the sheikh turned to his cousin, slowly, as though he had centuries to address the betrayal. You planned to use my ambition against me. You knew I would never resist an opportunity to preserve our history. That is what made the trap elegant. The cousin's voice trembled. I can explain everything. You will explain nothing, the sheikh said. You will listen. A suffocating silence fell. He folded his hands. For years you have expected my trust because of blood. But blood means nothing without loyalty. Tonight you attempted to weaponize my legacy and my name. The cousin swallowed hard, panic clouding his eyes. The sheikh nodded to security, but not for removal. Not yet. Stay where you are, he ordered. And then he did something unexpected. He turned toward her. What do you believe should happen next? He asked. The room froze. The experts stared at her, horrified. The advisors looked stunned. Even the cousin blinked like he'd misheard. She felt heat rise in her chest. Not from fear, but from the dissonance of being asked to speak in a room where her role had always been to disappear. She cleared her throat gently. Your Excellency, accountability must begin with transparency. The forged manuscripts must be secured, the contracts preserved, and those involved must make a record of their actions. Before excuses begin to rewrite the truth. The sheikh nodded slowly. Agreed. He turned to security. Collect every document, every device, every draft, now. The room crackled with movement, controlled, efficient, inescapable. The cousin's voice cracked. Cousin, please, mercy. The sheikh's reply was quiet, final, devastating. Mercy is for those who hesitate before betraying. You did not. He looked once more at her, steady, measured. You brought clarity when I stood at the edge of ignorance. She lowered her eyes, but this time, not in fear. In acceptance. Truth restores balance to a world that pretends not to need it. When the security team exited with the sealed evidence, a stillness settled across the salon. A fragile quiet, like the air after a storm but before anyone dares speak. The cousin was escorted to a corner seat, not bound but watched. The experts hunched over, writing frantic confessions under the supervision of advisors. It was the quietest kind of collapse. The sheikh remained seated at the head of the table, but something in his posture had changed. The arrogance had melted into a more refined authority. A man re-evaluating what strength actually looks like. She stood at the far end of the room, hands clasped, unsure whether to stay or step back into the anonymity she knew so well. The sheikh spoke without looking at her. Come here. Her breath stilled. She stepped forward, one cautious step at a time, stopping just short of the table. He studied her, not the uniform, not the tray, not the role, but the person. You knew precisely where to look, he said. How? She hesitated. I studied manuscript authentication. Years ago. Before I lost my scholarship. Before I left that life. She didn't explain the debt collectors, the immigration hearings, the bureaucratic collapse that swallowed her career. She didn't need to. Something in her voice carried that weight already. The sheikh nodded slowly. You should not be carrying trays in rooms full of men who lie for money. She lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. He continued. I have a forensic provenance institute, the only one in the region truly independent. They examine every artifact entering my collection, every claim, every document. He paused. It has lacked someone with your precision. She looked up, startled. I want you to join it, he said. Not as support staff, as a lead analyst. Her breath caught. You would have a salary, housing, legal sponsorship, he added. You would have a team, resources, and protection from men who think they can manipulate history. Her throat tightened. The offer wasn't just an offer, it was oxygen. A life she thought she had lost. A return to the world she loved. A chance to exist as more than a shadow. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. I observed something tonight, the sheikh continued. The more frightened you were, the clearer you became. That is rare. Priceless. She shook her head faintly. Your Excellency, I'm nobody. No, he said softly. You are what they fear most. A quiet mind that sees everything. She felt her vision blur for a moment, a flash of the version of herself she had buried years ago. The scholar, the analyst, the woman who once believed truth mattered more than survival. She exhaled, trembling. If you're certain, I am. Silence held them for a beat. Then she nodded, small, stunned, real. Yes, I'll accept. The sheikh leaned back, satisfied. Good. For the first time all night, the room felt aligned, balanced, whole. Opportunity arrives quietly, but it changes everything it touches. The institute overlooked the city from a quiet hill, sunlight hitting its glass walls every morning as if to remind her she had stepped into a life she once thought belonged to other people. She walked its corridors now with a badge, a title, and a team that waited for her decisions. No tray, no uniform, no need to disappear. Her office smelled faintly of old paper and cedar, the comforting scent of a world she thought she had lost forever. On the wall behind her desk hung a framed note from the sheikh's private collection appraisal board, simple, formal, but unmistakably honoring the analyst who had saved an entire legacy. Sometimes in the early mornings before her team arrived, she looked at her reflection in the darkened window and barely recognized the woman standing there. Steady, seen, whole. She wasn't afraid of being noticed anymore. Quiet strength builds a life louder than fear ever could.